Right now, inside your blood, there are cells that know how to fight. Not metaphorically. Literally. White blood cells that patrol your body every second of every day, looking for things that shouldn't be there, and destroying them before you even notice. But for most of human history, those cells weren't enough. A scratch from a rosebush could kill you in a week. A tooth infection could spread to your brain before anyone understood what was happening. Childbirth was one of the leading causes of death in women, not because of the birth itself, but because of what got inside afterward. Bacteria. Invisible. Relentless. And for 200,000 years of human existence, completely unstoppable once they were inside you. Until one September morning in 1928, in London, a Scottish scientist came back from vacation, looked at a Petri dish he had forgotten to throw away, and noticed something that almost didn't survive long enough to be noticed at all. That moment almost didn't happen. If the temperature in his lab had been 2 degrees warmer. If the window had been closed. If he had cleaned his bench before leaving instead of after coming back. 200 million people would not be alive today. Before 1928, there was no such thing as an antibiotic. Not an imperfect one. Not a primitive version. Not something that mostly worked. Nothing. If bacteria got into your blood, and in the world before modern sanitation, this happened constantly, your body either fought it off on its own, or it didn't. There was no third option. The people living through this didn't look any different from you. Same immune systems. Same capacity for pain, for fear, for lying awake in the night wondering if the infection would keep spreading. But here's what's almost impossible to fully picture now. In the early 1900s, 1 in 3 people who contracted pneumonia died from it. Not because pneumonia was incurable, it wasn't. Because the bacteria that caused it had nowhere to stop. During the First World War, more soldiers died from infected wounds than from the actual combat that caused them. Surgeons would amputate limbs not because the initial injury required it, but because the infection spreading from a minor wound was faster than anything they could do to stop it. A knee scrape in 1920 could become septicemia in 4 days. Septicemia, blood poisoning, killed in ways that made the original injury look mild. First the infection spreads locally. Then it enters the bloodstream. Then the fever climbs to a point where the body starts destroying itself trying to fight back. This was the ordinary world. This was what people knew. And somewhere in this world, in a basement laboratory at St. Mary's Hospital in London, a Scottish bacteriologist named Alexander Fleming had spent most of his career trying to find something, anything, that could kill bacteria without killing the patient along with it. He hadn't found it yet. But here's what almost nobody talks about. What was about to happen wasn't science. It was an experiment. It wasn't even really a discovery, in the way scientists usually mean that word. It was a dirty dish. And a window. And timing so precise that no one has ever been able to fully explain why it worked. In the summer of 1928, Fleming went on vacation. Before he left, he stacked his Petri dishes on his bench, cultures of Staphylococcus bacteria, the kind responsible for everything from skin infections to fatal blood poisoning.
A timeless peace still
he didn't
held
clean them
Oxford
before he
the
left.
storm.
He just left. Weeks later, when he came back to London, he picked up one of the dishes to examine it before throwing it away. And he stopped. Something had contaminated the culture. A mold had landed on the dish, probably blown in through an open window from a mycology laboratory 1 floor below, and where the mold had grown, the bacteria had died. Not been suppressed. Not been slowed. Killed. A clear, circular zone of dead bacteria surrounding the mold, exactly as if something in it was dissolving them. Fleming almost threw the dish away before he looked. He later said he wasn't entirely sure what made him stop. Curiosity, maybe. the slight wrongness of what he was seeing. The fact that in 20 years of bacteriology, he had never seen contamination behave this way. He identified the mold as Penicillium notatum. He called the substance it was producing penicillin. And then he ran into a problem. He couldn't purify it. The chemistry required to extract penicillin in a form stable enough to inject into a human being was beyond what his lab could do. He published his findings in 1929, concluded that the substance might have some applications as a topical antiseptic, and largely moved on. For 10 years, penicillin sat in the scientific literature. Known. Named. Completely unused. Humanity almost lost this chapter. Then the Second World War started. And suddenly the problem of infected wounds, the same problem that had killed more men than combat in the last war, was urgent in a way that purely academic curiosity never could have made it. At Oxford, a pathologist named Howard Florey and a biochemist named Ernst Chain pulled Fleming's 1929 paper out of the archives and decided to try again. Florey and Chain had something Fleming didn't: a team, a better understanding of organic chemistry, and a reason that couldn't wait. In 1940, they successfully purified penicillin for the first time. They tested it on mice infected with lethal doses of streptococcus. The untreated mice died within 16 hours. The ones that received penicillin lived. The first human trial was February 12, 1941. The patient was a policeman named Albert Alexander. He had scratched his face on a rose thorn several months earlier. The infection had spread to his face, his lungs, his shoulder. His eye had to be removed. He was dying. They injected him with the entire supply of penicillin they had been able to produce. Within 24 hours, he began to recover. The fever dropped. The abscesses shrank. Then they ran out of penicillin. They extracted what they could from his urine and re-injected it. Still not enough. After a month of partial improvement, Albert Alexander died. The second trial patient survived. The third survived. By the time researchers had figured out how to mass-produce the drug by growing the mold in large fermentation vats, using a technique developed partly in a government laboratory in Peoria, Illinois, the results were unambiguous. By D-Day, June 1944, the Allied forces had enough penicillin to treat every major infection among their troops. The death rate from infected wounds, which had been catastrophic in every previous war in history, collapsed. Here's what I want you to understand about the chain you're standing at the end of. That mold, Penicillium notatum, drifted into Fleming's lab through an open window. It landed on a dish he forgot to clean. He noticed it because he happened to examine it before throwing it away. He published findings that sat unread for a decade. A world war created the urgency to act on them. A policeman who scratched his face on a rose thorn proved the concept. A fermentation lab in Illinois figured out how to make enough of it to matter. Every antibiotic you have ever taken traces back to that open window. Every infection that didn't kill you. Every surgery that stayed clean. Every childhood illness that resolved with a course of pills instead of a funeral. The people who are alive today because of penicillin and the antibiotics that followed it, the conservative estimate is 200 million lives. Some researchers put it higher. 200 million people who exist because a scientist didn't clean his bench before vacation. That's not a metaphor. That's biology. That's history. That's the reason someone you love is still alive. It's easy to think about modern medicine as something that was always coming. As if the antibiotics in your cabinet were inevitable. As if the world was always going to figure this out. It wasn't. Fleming's discovery sat unused for a decade. Florey and Chain almost never pursued it. The first human trial ended in the patient's death because there wasn't enough of it. The mass production technique was stumbled onto, not engineered. At every point in this chain, a different decision, a cleaner desk, a closed window, a discarded paper, and the antibiotic era never begins. The accident that saved 200 million lives happened by the thinnest possible margin. We are not the descendants of the people who conquered disease through brilliance alone. We are the descendants of the ones who noticed what they almost threw away. And here's what I want you to think about tonight. Right now, somewhere in a laboratory, there is almost certainly something sitting on a bench that looks like contamination. That looks like a failed experiment. That looks like exactly the kind of thing you throw away before you go on vacation. The history of medicine is full of those moments. Most of them never get noticed. But the next one might already exist. And whether someone stops to look is the difference between a footnote and the next chapter in how humanity survived. That story starts next episode.